Hi, I'm Steven. I'm here with JJ, Tiffany, and Erock. We are Just Got Played, and we are introducing a new series today, and that is Gaming Through Themes. So we've done a series called Gaming Through Mechanisms. Mechanisms is how you interact with a board game, but themes are the subject of the game. So games can have multiple themes. They can have one theme. Theme is a very broad concept or a broad word, whether you're talking about books or movies or whatever. And when you're talking about board games, usually there's just a handful of ways that a game really invokes the theme. Usually the number one thing where the theme is present and right in front of your face is the art. So the art from a game typically comes from the theme of the game. Sometimes some games even have audio, right? They have apps and stuff too, so you can get audio for ambiance, etc. Another way that a game tends to invoke the theme is how you interact with the game, right? So if you're playing a game like Formula D, right, you shift the gears and that tells you what die you can use. That makes sense in the theme of the game. So a lot of games try to have mechanisms in a way that whatever you're doing mechanically in the game makes sense with the theme of the game. If you're playing a game and the mechanics of the game don't necessarily match the theme, then sometimes you'll hear us talk about things like it's a pasted on theme, which means maybe there's some art there. Maybe people have pasted on a theme, but it doesn't really invoke that theme to you. Because really what you're going for is immersion. And some games really lean into the immersion, right? You can be playing a game and you really care about saving that little cardboard chip from a fire because it's a dog or a cat or something. Or you could be playing a game like Nyctophobia, where you put on a blindfold so you are literally blind while you're playing the game, which invokes that sort of scary theme of being lost in a dark wood, right? So there are different ways that themes can work. There are also games that basically are themeless. Those are usually referred to as abstract games. So you have games like Tic-Tac-Toe and Connect Four, or games where the theme's really thin, like maybe Go or chess, right? Chess has a war game theme, but not really. So a lot of those games are sometimes referred to as abstract. So I think that basically covers what we're talking about with themes. And so we decided to start our very first episode with a very popular theme, and that theme is fantasy. And I will have to tell you that we couldn't even agree on fantasy. We were talking about maybe dividing this up into multiple videos, high fantasy, low fantasy. If you go look up fantasy on Wikipedia, there's like 30 different subgenres of fantasy. And so I just decided, you know what? We're not going to define fantasy. We're just going to say, I'm just going to say fantasy, and everybody can bring whatever game they want, or whatever two games they want that really invoke the theme fantasy for them. All right, so you all ready to get started? Cool. Well, I feel like I've talked enough, so I'm going to hand it over to Erock to tell us what is his favorite fantasy game.
Well, if you've been watching us at all over the past year or so, this is not going to be a surprise to you. So I'm going to talk quickly about the game after I go off on a little rant here. I just kind of want to sidecar onto Steven's motorcycle because there's a lot of games that have a fantasy theme, but I don't feel like they're fantasy games. All right. Like you can sort the geek, into types. And this is one of them, types. And I'm just going to give you a, for instance, Terra Mystica comes up as a fantasy game. And I mean, I get it because it's like genies and dwarves and gnomes and mountain and, giants and stuff. But it doesn't feel like fantasy. You're just, upgrading these buildings into other buildings. It's a great game. Don't get me wrong. I really like Terra Mystic. It's fantastic. But aside from it being about dwarves, you don't do anything special in it to feel like you're playing a fantasy game. So I feel like there's a really good list of games that will fall under this fantasy ideology, this theme, as it were. And like I said, if you sort the geek as such, you'll see there's a ton of them on there. But for me personally, I feel like for the purposes of this list, it just really had to feel like I was playing in a fantasy environment. So my first choice is my number one game of all time, and that's Gloomhaven. I love Gloomhaven. You've heard me say it a million times. I won't belabor the point. I think it's a fantastic choice for this list also because it really plays like a dungeon crawler where you play a class, then you go into these various forms of dungeons or on an island or whatever, and your little party's battling whatever baddies are out there. And it might be all kinds of different demons or skeletons or all of that stuff. But what I really, really like about this world is it's very unique. When Isaac Childress made this, he could have just gone with the standard tropes and, been orcs and goblins and things like that and elves and dwarves and gnomes, but he didn't do that. He created a whole different world with all kinds of different beings on it. And they're all very unique to this one world. And it makes sense in a way that orcs and elves and dwarves make sense, which is very impressive to me that he made this, out of thin air and it still makes sense. Like the whole thing, like everything that you think of when you think of fantasy. I just think it's a really fun game to play. If you have never heard of this before, I would highly recommend starting with Jaws of the Lion. If you've already played Gloomhaven, then keep playing it. If you're like me, you are waiting for Frosthaven. Okay, I'm going to go off on a second rant here real quick. Sorry, I didn't even think about this rant when we started, but we're still waiting for Frosthaven. All right. And I know John got it at the end of December, and we're at the end of January at this point. So here's my little rant. I get it. If I back something and it shows up in a store before I have it, I'm going to be a little angry. But we back through our store to support them. And so we have to sit around and wait until the stores finally get theirs before we're allowed to get ours. And that is incredibly frustrating and disappointing just because we want to support our FLGS. So I don't have a solution for this. Maybe you send it out to the stores first and give them some kind of a date. So you can't sell them till this date or whatever. But this is a total off rant to everything going on here. I know that. And I apologize, but I'm really frustrated because we don't have Frosthaven yet. And I'm so excited to play it. Like this little side view, like adventure we just went on, that ought to tell you how much I love Gloomhaven. Like I am so in love with Gloomhaven that I'm so excited to play Frosthaven and it's driving me crazy. So I basically told you nothing about Gloomhaven, but I love it. So that should at least back that up. I love the Gloomhaven. So,
well, it's pretty interesting. A little bit of a spoiler here because we do have People's Choice. So we'll be listing the People's top 2 picks as well. I was a little surprised that Gloomhaven did not come out on top in that poll. If you go to look at Board Game Geek, it's the #1 rated game of all time. I mean, a lot of people really love this game. It is definitely, no question, a fantasy game through and through. So, when I set up these polls, sometimes I feel like, well, I know what they're going to be. And then, man, I'm just wrong sometimes. So here's a situation where I was wrong. Gloomhaven is not one of the top 2 from the people.
I was ready to kind of put that on the side and then talk about Gloomhaven when we talked about the People's Choice Awards, but it wasn't chosen and I'm not letting it go, man. It's Gloomhaven. People play Gloomhaven. Play it on Steam if you want. It's awesome.
Yeah.
The computer takes care of the monster movement and all the other upkeep. It's great. Play it. Just play Gloomhaven. It's fantastic.
Cool. Well, so that makes me wonder, actually, if you're picking Gloomhaven, Tiffany, what is your favorite fantasy game of all time?
So both of my games, I noticed, for me, they happen in the card play. So I was thinking about like what kind of things do these games have in common, the 2 that I picked. And admittedly, this was a really hard even line of games for me to get, or line of videos for me to get behind, because I don't really pay attention to theme when I'm playing the game. I don't look at artwork. I don't read the flavor text. I just pay attention to
you're hardcore. You're just focused.
I'm just like, what does the card do? How does this work with what I'm doing? How does this go in my engine? And, even if it's not an engine builder, I'm still trying to build an engine. And so the 2 games that I picked, so it was hard for me to pick games, but then when I really thought about it, I was like, well, these 2 games that, for this fantasy category that I've picked, I get immersed in the card play, and there's some way that it makes me do that. And so this is the thing. So my number one, not surprisingly, Gloomhaven. And the way that they draw you in is by making you, you're happy, we know, is by making you choose the top of a card and the bottom of a card that's in your hand. And so when you're planning out your move, and it's such a thematic game. So the moves and the things that you're doing, your abilities, they make sense with the name. They make sense with how the consequences or the costs. They make sense with, what the end result is, where your character moves as a result, or where the monsters move, or like everything works together to make sense thematically. So it's super solid as far as that goes. So when I'm playing Gloomhaven, I'm really I'm thinking in terms of, am I going to try to sneak over and backstab? Or is this more of a thing where I'm going to try to hang back and support my fellow members by healing someone or doing something like that? So I'm really thinking in the terms of the game the whole time. And so I think really for me, that made Gloomhaven a very thematic and immersive game, because the only games that I'm going to pick for these are games that are going to be immersive, at least to me, because for me to even notice the theme, I have to be pretty in it.
That's a really good point, babe. I didn't even think about that. I mean, I love the Gloomhaven and I think it's a fantasy theme, but you're right. It's one of those games where you say, all right, I'm going to do sweeping strikes, and you don't have to explain what that means. It means I'm going to hit 2 or 3 things with my sword. I'm going to do a stunning blow. Nobody says, well, what's that do? Well, I'm going to hit him and try to stun him. It all magic missiles. It's going to shoot missiles at 3 different things. I mean, everything makes sense. You really don't have to go into explanations of what you're trying to do. You just say it, and it just makes sense.
And you can see it in your head. You can you know what that is because you've played, 16 MMOs before, and you know how that works. And I don't know. It's fun.
All right, cool. So that's 2 for Gloomhaven. You won't be hearing Gloomhaven from me, but JJ, I don't know. Maybe he could jump in and say that his favorite is Gloomhaven as well. What do you got?
My number one pick is Gloom. So I too will sidecar, and I will say that, we had our discussion on fantasy. We all agreed it's magic. You know what I'm saying? So there you go. That was it. There was a little thing on there. Even Steven, he loved it. That was it. That was it. That's it. No, we did not agree, but we do agree that Star Wars is space magic. So every time you say theme, I always want to say space magic. So that's my little sidecar there. And then I'll piggyback off of Erock as well. I'm waiting for 2 games, one from Kickstarter and one from Game Fun. So you can't go on your rant, Steven, about Kickstarter, because the other one's Game Fun. Both of them are He-Man games. So they probably would have made my list for fantasy. I would have just named even the 2 because technically they're a little bit different. So when it comes in, we'll have to do this again when the games finally come in. So we have to do He-Man when it comes in. So we're going to do fantasy again when that comes in, just because this is ridiculous. So
we'll do
that's
your
my
top
little rant.
2 favorite He-Man games.
Yeah, no, it's fantasy.
He-Man the theme.
He's magic. He's magic. He's all magic. That's all it is.
Your
That's
top
all
favorite loincloths.
Yeah, well, they're 2 different games, so we'll see. I'll do a review, so you'll get to know all the differences about it. But for now, since I don't have that, and I'm going to make a pick. So for me, I don't know what rant this is. This is number 6 or something like that. I'm going to try to pick games that I have not talked about, just to be a little different, because I like to do that. So they're not going to be the most popular pick. But for me, I look at theme in any game. So any game that the theme works well with it, the cards match up with all the different, whatever TV show, comic book, whatever it's going on in it. I like it. So the games I'm going to pick are in that vein, just for this whole series, just so everybody knows. So that's my little JJ rant. Okay, enough with the teaser. We're going to move on to my first pick for fantasy, and that is Hogwarts Battle, the deck builder co-op thing. And yes, it's a co-op, and yes, I picked it because the theme is amazing. That is the number one thing I look at when I'm playing a game. You can just slap a whatever on it, what were we calling that? Abstract or whatever? whatever you want to call it. I hate when games do that, where it can literally be anything.
Based
and you
on
can just
theme.
Yeah, it's just you can slap a thing on there. They just put it on there because Marvel sells, so they just slapped it on there. It was like doesn't make any sense. Hogwarts Battle was the first game I played, and I was like, man, this feels like I'm in the movie. I only watched the movies, so whatever y'all Hogwarts fan people, Slytherin, Gryffindor, Paleosaurus Rex, or whatever, can yell at me all you want, but Hogwarts Battle, I actually liked after watching the movies. I've only played like book 4 or 5 or whatever because everybody just says skip the first 3. I want to play all of them. I've only gotten to play the 4 because I get with a group that has it and then we don't get to do any of the other things, but very thematic. I like that each character has their own special power that seemed to go with the movies because I haven't read the book, but it flowed very well. And I like that it was very difficult, very co-op. You have to work together. Theme is amazing. So that's my number 1 pick for fantasy.
We have that. Cool. We've played that.
All of it?
Babe, it's the game we move when we plug in your computer.
The game we move when you plug in.
Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle.
What?
Wow.
We're using it as a computer stand?
Yeah, so definitely we can add that to the list because I have not played all the other books. So we definitely need to do that sometime.
I don't think I've played a single Harry Potter board game.
This one's pretty good.
It's
It's a good co-op deck builder.
Yeah. So a lot of the Hogwarts, they just, whatever you slap it on there and they just call it Harry Potter because it's Harry Potter. And this all the time, this is like 7 rants right now. When I go to Barnes and Nobles for their little sales or whatever, they have their own little Harry Potter section, but all their board games are not on the sale shelf. So I can't get this because I still not found it on sale. And it's ridiculously expensive for a 4-player deck building game. So it's really annoying. But all the other games on there, you can tell it's just like Hogwarts Monopoly. Who cares about that crap? This is very thematic. It's very good. I like it.
You just worked that in so that I can find a cheap copy for you, didn't you?
I mean, we got a thing going on. It's a trope. People love it. That's why they keep coming back for these storylines, Steven. So there you go. That's just how it is. But I would buy it for somebody that I know is a Harry Potter fan so I can play that with them. So just so you know, if you do that, it will be a nice gift and hopefully we'll get somebody else starting their board game collection. And that's what we do here at Just Got Played.
All right. Well, when we started talking about fantasy games, I pulled up my list as I do and my, rated games, and I started going down the list, and I've played a lot of fantasy games and I like a lot of fantasy games, but I was surprised that really none of them were at the top of my list. Apparently my favorite games are not fantasy games, and I was a little surprised. I expected to find some up there pretty high, and it turns out I had skipped over one. And I was talking to Lloyd about it, and he was like, yeah, that's definitely a fantasy theme because it's based on League of Legends, right? Because I love mechs versus minions, but I just skipped right over it like, oh, it's a steampunk or something game, right? Like it's not fantasy. And so I was like, okay, well, it's technically fantasy, but this isn't my technically fantasy favorite games list. This is games that really scream to me that they're fantasy. So anyway, maybe mechs versus minions should be my number 1, but I'm skipping over it and I'm going on because, I don't know if you've played it. It's just like it's mechs and it's programming and all the actions are like a buzzsaw and a skewer and like there's no cast fireball or, anything. I mean, there's some runes on the board, I guess. And, the minions are obviously, some kind of magical creatures or something, but it just, I don't know, whatever reason, it just didn't scream fantasy to me. So I skipped over it. And the first game that I got to on my list that really does evoke fantasy for me, it's very D&D adjacent, is Role Player. And for me, when I was a kid, I played pen and paper role-playing games, like D&D. I played video games like D&D and Might and Magic, and I could spend hours rolling up a character, just like hit the thing, give me better dice. I'm going to allocate this. I'm going to make this kind of creature or whatever, and, I really liked that, just that system of rolling up characters, even, if you didn't even ultimately get to do anything with them. But, playing something like wizardry on the computer, I could roll characters for hours. And so that's a really interesting theme to me. And role player is absolutely fantasy, right? You choose a board and you decide if you want to be the male or female version. The art is the only thing that's different, I think. But each race has got different modifiers on their dice, and then you've got your class and your backstory. And the game is very mechanically not so fantasy because you're just placing dice, basically. But I have found myself during the game, for no reason other than just immersion and fun, buying something that wasn't the thing necessarily that would score me the most points, but was just like fit with my character. Like,
Nice.
I should have that. I should have the leather armor because I'm a rogue or something. I don't know. So whenever you find yourself doing that, that means the theme, is really getting to you. And I will say, if you add them, what is the first expansion called? Monsters and Minions?
Monsters and Minions. Yeah.
Okay, I was just talking about mechs versus minions, so I was wondering if I was getting that mix.
The first expansion, mechs versus minions.
Yeah, yes. Right, exactly. So, if you have that, you actually do go out and adventure and kill these little monsters, these little minions or whatever, and there's a big boss that you're trying to fight. So that even really more adds to the fantasy theme because there's some bad fantasy creature and there are all these little things. But even without that, I mean, you've got these fantasy skills, you've got these fantasy races, you've got all this weird equipment. And so even though, it doesn't feel like I'm dungeon crawling or anything, it feels like I'm rolling up a character, and rolling up a character is a essential part to RPGs, and to me, and this one is definitely a fantasy, RPG. So yeah. Anyway, so that's why I started with role player as my first pick, and I know Tiffany, you like this one too, right?
Yes, I love that game. It's so much fun, and I mean, it takes you longer, I think, than you expect it to play that game. But I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so fun. Let's do it again. So it's definitely one of my top 15, I'd say.
One of your top 15 fantasy games?
No. I wish I knew enough games in my head for it to be a subsection.
Well, you could be like me and just skip over a bunch of games too, right? And that's what I'm going to do now, right? Because I want to get your opinion on this, because I'm just going to roll into my number 2. Since we all did our number 1s. The next one that I'm going to skip over, because it's absolutely a fantasy game, but it doesn't feel like a fantasy game at all to me, is Werewords.
I guess
you've got a seer, you've got werewolves.
No.
Okay, so hold on a second. I got this. This is going to go into the behind the scenes here of our chat, where it depends on how the werewolves are created, because if it's by magic, which it usually is in most genres, and not hereditary, then it's...
But there's a seer who can see the future.
Nah, that's horror,
magic.
Not fantasy.
Nah,
seer is not horror, sir. There is horror fantasy as well, but werewolves are not horror. They're just horror.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, either way.
What's the sparkly vampires? Sparkly vampires is not horror.
It did not invoke fantasy for me. You
were right to skip it.
I am right to skip it. I still feel that it is technically a
great
fantasy game, even if
that is fantasy. That is 100% fantasy. You're talking about magic wolves.
Yeah, it can be fantasy horror, right? Yeah. All right. So now here's the next one, which I wasn't sure about skipping over, but again, when I play this game, I get zero fantasy vibes from it, and that is Quacks of Quedlinburg.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Witches!
I saw that on the list too. I'm like, that's not... I mean, I get it. You're mixing up potions. But the whole point of the game is
they don't work.
In this real town, these quacks would come in and pretend to make these potions up. So
yeah. It's snake oil.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly like snake oil. Exactly.
It definitely has fantasy overtones, but it does not evoke fantasy for me at all. So I skipped it.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the type of witches you're talking about. So if they're making potions and stuff, then yeah. If they're just using magic, like some Scarlet Witch and Marvel or something, that's fantasy.
All right.
Marvel's not fantasy.
Marvel is fantasy, sir. That's all. You just throw everything in there. You just throw it on the wall. It sticks. It's Marvel. It's all stuff mixed together.
No, sir. No, sir.
All right.
I don't know what you're talking about. What?
Along those lines, my actual pick for my second game, and I thought about this a little bit too, because I was like, does it fit for fantasy or not? Because it's really more mythology than fantasy, right? And
nope,
so my
out. Mythology's out.
Not for me. It's not. It's in. Maybe it'll come back if we do a mythology themed episode. But I'm going.
Bring it back.
I'm going with Champions of Midgard.
Champions of Midgard.
Yeah.
Champions of Midgard. They're the trolls. They're the big bad beasts. There's Valhalla if you have that expansion. I mean, everything you're doing in this game is to gather up dice to go do these epic battles against these epic monster creatures, right? And that is totally fantasy. I mean, that's what you're doing in a dungeon crawl. That's what you're doing in mythology.
Technically, it qualifies because trolls can be magic or.
Well, but in this case, they're specifically Norse mythology. So this is absolutely a mythology game. But I mean, I think mythology falls under fantasy anyway. But
it's a technical subgenre because mythology they do a lot of magic stuff, and then you got. Once again, you got Marvel, you got a Thunder Hammer. That's
no Marvel veto.
Defining things is hard. I tell you, JJ acts like it's, I know it when I see it, but defining it is hard.
If there's no magic in it, then it's technically mythology and not fantasy. So.
But there is no magic in it for the humans.
If you have deities that are doing things, that's magic?
Mythology, not fantasy. None of your thing. You have like spearmen, bowmen, swordsmen. No.
Yeah, your stuff isn't magical, but the things you're fighting are absolutely magical.
No, they're mythological. They're not magical.
Yeah, are they shooting thunderbolts and
I don't know. They might
water come out of the air.
And plus, there's the whole Valhalla thing, right?
Again,
right?
Mythology.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. I agree absolutely that it's mythology. I just love mythology. Okay. But anyway, here's Champions of Midgard is, I don't know, it's like a worker placement game, right? You put your workers out, you get this stuff. But the reason that you're doing that is you're getting these dice, right? And these dice allow you to fight draugrs and trolls and sea beasts and all of these things. And that's where all the points come from. In fact, I don't know, where do points come from that's not from combat? I'm sure there's somewhere. Maybe can you buy the boats or something? Maybe there were some points. I don't remember. But the place you get most of your points is from going and fighting these mythological beings, right?
There's also the, I forget what they're called, but they're like foretellings or whatever. And they're kind of like points for stuff. But yeah, you're right. The majority of the points come from fighting stuff. Yeah.
And I also have to say, I didn't talk to Lloyd about what his picks were. I was hoping he was going to be able to make it. And so I didn't want to be surprised by what his picks were. But I figured that this might make his list. So in solidarity with Lloyd, I am choosing Champions of Midgard. Incidentally, if I had ruled out Champions of Midgard, I think I probably would have gone with Ethnos as my next pick, which you can't tell me that's not fantasy. It
has elves in it. That's fantasy.
It's elves and centaurs and
fantasy,
all kinds of stuff.
No, absolutely not. All you're putting.
Listen, sir. You missed the whole discussion in the Discord, so you don't get to say. You're out of here. You're out of here. We already went all
everything you doing.
I read a lot of it.
You play a band of fantasy creatures.
It's all fantasy.
Your turn.
Yes, elves and trolls and stuff are all fantasy.
Put another disc on top of this other disc. That's all you do.
Oh, you're talking about theme.
He's talking about immersion. It's not as immersive in the fantasy theme.
Yeah. There you go. But mechanics wise, you can't. Yeah, but theme, it's fantasy.
If fantasy immersion, your drawn line is Gloomhaven, then there's not going to be much above that line, buddy. I hate to tell you.
That's true.
Okay,
I would say Hogwarts battle. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's hear what your second is.
Look, I'm not saying I'm legally right. I'm just saying I'm right. Okay.
You are entitled to your opinion, sir. We will not agree on any of the things. We just give our opinions, and then, that's what we have to know.
Well, okay. Now I want to hear what Erock's second is, so I can tell
you. There you go.
Apart.
All right. So I know that I am a crotchety old man, and I vetoed everybody else's stuff because I don't believe it's real fantasy. But I kind of did that to myself, too, because there's a lot of really good. I love Champions of Midgard, not fantasy. You know what I'm saying? I love War of the Ring. I don't really think that's a fantasy game. I love Spirit Island.
Whoa, you don't think War of the Ring is fantasy?
Not really.
Lord of the Rings?
Nah, Lord of the Rings is, but only somewhat, because it's really only like Gandalf and Sauron and Saruman. Everybody else is just a warrior.
And all this magical
I feel like War of the Ring doesn't really evoke a fantasy.
What are you talking about?
I'm sorry, yes.
What?
I'm sorry.
There's a bunch of wizards in there.
Nope.
There's literally a bunch of wizards.
Nope. It's not making my list. You know what made my list? Descent. Because that's fantasy immersion. And that's what I'm talking about.
This is going to be the most divisive
I just wanted to
gaming through series that we've had this whole time. Every
I
single
expect
one.
to be canceled because of my opinions on this. Yes. But yeah, I'm going with Descent as my second option. I believe it's technically second edition Descent that I'm referring to. We also have Descent, third edition, or the one that you like with the 3D stuff and all that in Trink on our shelves. We're getting there. But I had a lot of fun playing Descent second edition. It is very similar to Gloomhaven in a lot of ways because it's a campaign and you're running, dungeons and stuff. I always played the Overlord, which I thought was a lot of fun. We played with 4 players against me. So the 4 players could be anything they wanted to, mages and clerics and paladins and warriors and thieves and whatever. There's a class, 8 million classes in Descent. These are all very standard fantasy tropes in the classes and all that. But then one person plays the Overlord. So they play against the players. All right. And this is just a lesson to anybody out there who wants to do this kind of thing or does this kind of thing. The object is not to beat the players. The object is to give them the best experience they could possibly have. All right. That's the object of this game. And that's how I played it when I was the Overlord, because there were absolutely times that I could have just beat them down, but that's no fun for anybody. I mean, I guess it could have been fun for me if I enjoy that kind of a thing, but then I have 4 other people that are just sitting there grumbling the whole time, not having fun. So I like to play it out to the point that every adventure was like a coin toss at the end, because that's when it's fun. When you're in this thing as a group and you're doing your best and they're all trying to outsmart the Overlord and trying to beat him and all this. And I'm just trying to make it fun. And that's what makes it a really good experience. I promise you, if you talk to the people who played Descent with me, they'll tell you it was great. They loved it. They want to do it again if it was possible, because it's about that experience. And this isn't me patting myself on the back, even though I am awesome. I'll just put that out there. I'm awesome. So I don't need to pat myself on the back. But I'm just trying to let everybody out there know that if this is something that you'd like to do, play it for the players. Don't just beat somebody down. That's not going to inspire anybody. They're not going to walk away having a great time. They're just not going to want to play anymore, really. But if it sounds like something you'd like to do, Descent's awesome. We always had a really, really good time playing Descent. It's very fantasy. The Overlord is all kinds of spells and stuff. And of course, like I said, the players could be magicians and all that. There's dragons and everything else going on. But at the end of the day, it's a campaign of a series of dungeon crawls. And I think it's fantastic. And, now that you've seen my 2 picks for this, I'm basically telling you that fantasy is a dungeon crawl. And if it's not fantasy. So,
role player.
That was like
fantasy.
You know what? 2 hot takes.
Agreed.
I actually talked to Tiff a lot about role player before we started this. And my initial feeling was that's not good enough. All you're doing is placing dice down. But then I actually changed my mind, because the expansions, you actually go out and do that stuff. So at that point, it does feel like a fantasy game. Not only am I putting these dice down and building a character, but I feel like the character comes to life because you're using the character to do things as opposed to just some abstract character. Don't get me wrong, Steve, I agree with you 100%. There are a ton of games that I've played where I hardly played the game. Just as an example, City of Villains / City of Heroes. I played that game 2% of the time that I was logged into that game. All I did was make more. It's like, oh, that's a great idea for a villain. And then I would make it. And I was like, that's great. And then I'd take them on like one adventure, like, all right, that was cool. Now what? Now what can I make? So I agree. I love the character creation process. But I feel like, in that instance, the expansions really pushed it over the edge and made it qualify under Eric's rules as a fantasy game.
Well, you definitely are patting yourself on the back, but spoiler alert: when we get to the people's choices, you are not going to be happy.
What is this again? Hogwarts battle. You're not crawling in a dungeon. You're fighting all the bad guys. Very thematic. But I kind of do agree with you. So as far as you're making, okay, so that's an interesting take, which you missed out in the Discord discussion. So if you're making a fantasy game, I do agree you have to go on a journey or somewhere Middle Earth or through a dungeon. Otherwise, it's just not. If you're making something not, you gotta crawl through something. I would agree on that part.
Wait, does your Hogwarts game do that?
It's very thematic with the games or with the storyline, sir. But I'm just agreeing with Erock on this one point. Okay, so if you say I'm going to make a fantasy game and you're not going on a journey to drop a ring off somewhere or take these little people on something or somewhere, then I would agree that it's probably not fantasy. Game.
All right.
Game.
Well,
just the game.
Now I want to hear what your number 2 pick is.
Great. Okay. So my number 2 pick is Descent. No. Okay. So my number 2 pick is going to be very controversial because, as Erock was stating, if you just slap a theme on there, it doesn't make it a fantasy, sci-fi, whatever you want to call it. But in this case, I thought it was very thematic, even though it is part of an ongoing series where they just took a bunch of themes and slapped it into their engine or whatever you want to call it. Mine is Lord of the Rings, the deck builder from Cryptozoic. So, yes, it's in the vein of DC and Naruto and like Attack on Titan, all the Cryptozoic stuff that they have, but specifically made for Lord of the Rings. They had the 1 and the 2, played both of them, liked them a lot. I didn't really know about Lord of the Rings when I was playing it, but after watching it, I was like, oh man, that makes more sense now. Why whatchamacallit has a sword and all this different things. So the difference between this version of the Cryptozoic deck builders is that each character had a special signature card that went with them. So whoever the main king guy, whatever his name was, he had his little sword. That one. There you go. And then Frodo had his. He had the ring, obviously, and then Samwise was in there, and I forgot what he had. But most of the time in
he had hairy feet.
Just whatever. I don't even know what you're saying right now.
And potatoes.
So each character, like in DC, they have their character ability on their card. But in this one, you actually have a starting deck, and then each character has a specific card. When you draw it, you get like a special ability on there. Whatever. The point is the special cards are thematic, the powers are thematic, and I liked all the characters that came out. They were from the movie. I was like, ooh, I know what that one is. I know what that one is. So not super thematic because you can just slap whatever theme you want on as they've done. You know, they've done all their stuff. But Cryptozoic, as far as I can tell from all the games that I've played from their deck building engine, very thematic for all of them. And I like the Lord of the Rings version. I would play that one definitely again, which I would not say for some of the other crappy versions of them. This is my number 2 right after DC. So, and then you can, whatever. Might do the rankings.
I don't think I even knew they had one of these.
They have 2. Yes. For Lord of the Rings. They're both very good.
I mean, Lord of the Rings is one of those things like they do slap that on a lot of things and not all of them are great.
Yes.
So, but I thought you were originally talking about the Fantasy Flight one, the living card game, I think. But
I have not played that one, but Fantasy Flight usually does really well. If it's anything like Marvel Champions or Arkham, the living card games that they have,
the same as those. Yes. It's just Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Marvel Champions is very thematic when we get there, and then Arkham Horror very thematic when we get there. So I like those 2 versions. So I imagine Lord of the Rings. I think they didn't make it very far. It got canceled or something like that. It might be still going, but it's just not as popular. So all I know is I don't see new sets of it.
Can you mix like them I do with Champions? Or are they 2 completely different games?
They're completely different games. They just have a bunch of living card games. So Arkham Horror has a bunch of sets that are still coming out.
No, I mean, you're saying Cryptozoic made the 2 Lord of the Rings games. Can you mix them together? Or is it really
you can, but that's like games? Putting the first movie and the second movie together. I don't know if you want
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, you got it's based off the 2 movies. I don't know why they didn't do number 3, which I wish they would have. See, I would have just bought the whole set. That's the only reason why I haven't bought it, because they stopped for some reason. But very thematic for the first movie and very thematic for the second movie. So you had all the characters separated. I mean, you can mix them, but that just kind of I wouldn't do that. That's like
funny that funny that you're talking about the movies when, I mean, it's books. Come on. Why isn't it the
Yeah.
books?
Listen, the cards have the movie scenes in there, and I
Yeah,
recognize the movie scene. So I was like, I remember that scene. So I don't remember the names, but I remember the scenes.
When you first started talking about this, you're talking about mashing up stuff and et cetera. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he picking Smash Up?
That's what
that
I
was my
thought.
theory too. Yes, I was
Yeah.
like, he's choosing
I was like,
Smash.
you're talking about that in every video for every theme.
I mean, you
Would fit
can.
everything, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
It's like
I don't.
flops.
No.
Yeah.
I don't like
Yeah.
smashing up the different things. It's like taking two different. Oh no, I can't do it.
All right. Well, before we get to the people's choice, Tiffany, bring us home with your number 2.
My number 2, again, I said both of my games it's in the game, it's in the card play. So my number 2 favorite fantasy game that uses cards for me was Mystic Vale. And so Mystic Vale is a card builder where you've got sleeves and you are sliding in inserts and they're 1/3 of the card that they're going to eventually comprise. And you buy an insert and you slide it into the sleeve and you build your deck of cards this way. So I really get into this because some of the creatures are super cool. And I like, this is one of those games, especially in the app, I've noticed. But in the regular game too, I look at the artwork and I make connections like, I see how it uses these elements and it's this creature. So that makes total sense. And I just really like how Mystic Vale incorporates the fantasy elements into that card game, which I didn't see it on the list, but they're fantastical creatures. And I mean, you can't have all the crap that you have in Mystic Vale without some kind of fantasy magic. So I'm going with Mystic Vale.
Yeah, I don't know why it wasn't on the list. It absolutely fits. I mean, it's the whole like living land and cursed lands and all these different characters going on. I mean,
Well, when you talk about the lists on Board Game Geek, particularly when you're talking about themes, those are just families. So they're like completely user driven. So, it's not like mechanisms where games have to have mechanisms when they're submitted, so it's very easy for things to just be missed. You could edit it and add it, if you want to improve that online database.
I might.
But it gets hard when you're, talking about thematic games, which is what we're doing in this series. So it's real easy to miss something. Although, sometimes you get help from neutral. Our fan who added 30 games to the user poll. I put the user poll up there, or the people's poll up there. Hey, what are your favorite fantasy games? And I always seed it with 8 to 10 of the most popular games that are out there. But people can add their own. And he added like 30. It was crazy. There were a lot of games in there, a lot of votes. But let's get to what were the top 2. And I will say that there are probably 3 fantasy IPs out there that are the sort of behemoth big dog IPs, right? And we've probably already talked about all of them. Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons, and Harry Potter. I think I would say those are the real big fantasy IPs. I'm on the fence about whether Marvel should be a fantasy IP or not, but those other 3 definitely are 800-pound gorillas in this space. So the people did respect that, and they did choose 2 of those IPs for their top games. And so the first one, their number 1 choice, is The Lord of the Rings: Journeys in Middle-earth. So if you have not heard of this, you might have heard of Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. And this uses that system, I guess I'll call it. It's from the same publisher, right? And it's an app-driven board game. So, you put this app on a tablet or a phone or something, and you'll start up a mission because it's a campaign. So in this one, you're going to go through a series of missions or whatever they're called in the campaign, scenarios or something. And you're going to say, okay, well, here are the characters and here's the equipment that I have with these characters, and then start. And then it will tell you, here's how you got to lay out the map. And there's a randomization there too, right? So it's not just, so I guess you could replay it. It's not the same thing every time. It's like, put this map tile here, put this map tile here, put this one on this side here, put out these tokens here and these tokens here and these tokens here. And then, okay, here's a thing you need to go explore, or here's a threat or something like that. I mean, I haven't actually played the game, so I'm just talking about it based on my experience. John and I did talk about Mansions of Madness 2nd edition when we did that top 25 games collected list in December, because that was, I don't know, number 2 or 3. It was way up there, even though I've never played that either. So this is the Lord of the Rings theme, and it is very integrated in here, right? All the characters that you would expect, and the monsters and just the kind of stuff you have to do is all just straight out of Lord of the Rings. Erock, I know you have this on your shelf unplayed. What kind of drew you to the game, though?
Well, I mean, in case you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan of the Lord of the Rings in general. But that wasn't really enough to pull me into this one per se, because again, I refer to the fact that there are a billion Lords of the Rings games, and some of them are great and some of them are not. But I did start to pay attention a little bit when it caught some buzz. But I like the system. I mean, this actually qualifies under Erock's rules because it's basically a dungeon crawl. It's a series of dungeon crawls in which you have objectives to do and side quests. And a lot of what I read about the game is that, it's about timing, but not like Gloomhaven timing. It's more about the pace of the game. So like in this, you're given 5 side quests. Good luck getting all that done and the main quest. So you're going to have to make choices along the way. Like, what are we going to actually do to try and win this game? And I like that it's set in the Lord of the Rings world. I'm well versed in that world just because, I'm from a time when you didn't have 8 million channels on your TV. And, I read these books. I loved them. I reread these books. And when this stuff did start coming out, I watched these movies and stuff. Like, I love Lord of the Rings. So the lore makes sense to me. I really appreciate the world. Like, all the little nuances of the world make sense to me. Like if you're like, we're going to go into Mirkwood. Ooh, Mirkwood. That's going to be tough, or we're in the Shire today. It's like, oh, okay. That conjures a completely different image in my head. So, it's a really good choice as far as theme goes, because that's what initially drew me to it, was the theme. And then I had to investigate to see if it was actually something worth playing. You know what I'm saying? So yes, much like Descent 3rd edition, it is in shrink on our shelves, but we will get there. See, part of the problem is too many campaign games. That's hard. You're committing to 10, 12 games every time that you start a brand new campaign game. And we're real people with real lives, and we work late sometimes and have families that, we don't have time to just sit down and play 12 games in a row of something. That'll take us all year to do that kind of a thing. So, but there are these things, and I collect them for us, and Babe takes a hand in that as well. And eventually we're going to get around to playing them. And this one's high on my list of things I'd like to play.
Isn't Gloomhaven 100 campaigns?
Yeah. And
okay.
Yes, and that's part of it. Now I'm waiting on Frosthaven. So how am I supposed to play Descent? And how am I supposed to play Lord of the Rings? I got Frosthaven coming up.
I'm playing.
Quit your job and you just stream 24/7, and then there you go.
That would be awesome. I just need a Patreon set up to pay us approximately $200,000 a year, so that Babe and I can sit around and play games and buy whatever you guys want us to buy, and we'll play those too. And we'll get all the fancy computer equipment to record everything, and we'll pay everybody to edit for us, and that's what we'll do 24 hours a day. Okay,
let me
so
check
somebody
my,
set that
let
up.
me check my
and
wallet.
Pay us, and that's what we'll do.
No,
hey, you say it sarcastically, sir, but that's life goals for me. Okay,
I'm saying set it up. Give us the 200,000. We'll do it.
Well, instead of that, no, I'm playing a fantasy campaign with my kids right now, actually, and I will say
tactics.
Yeah, adventure tactics. Domian's Tower, and we're, I don't know, maybe 6 in. I think there's maybe 10 to 12. I don't know exactly how many scenarios there are in there. My kids are loving it. That's a lot easier to get to the table because everybody I'm playing with lives in my house. But we're still only, doing about one a week now. Basically, we do one on the weekend. They can be sort of long. We'll set it up. We'll try to do the whole game on Saturday. We'll usually finish it on Sunday. Just leave it on the table, But we'll get through it here just in a few weeks. So yeah, that's all right. But I will say that Erock, I think your definition of fantasy, if you had to write it out, would have a whole lot of asterisks in fine print. I'm trying to track it here, but I'm lost in the legalese. Sorry.
You would probably need a flow chart.
I love flowcharts.
Babe will make it for you.
But based on it can't be just a cube pusher, and it has to have a dungeon crawl in it. You're gonna love the people's second pick, which is Lords of Waterdeep. So this is a Dungeons and Dragons game. Waterdeep is a location that is recurring in D&D campaigns and story and books and stuff like that. I always think of it as a hive of scum and villainy, but there's only some of that in there. I guess there's other good stuff. But it is a game that if you look at it, unless you have the little D&D meeples, which are called D&D-ples or something.
We do. Yes.
You have those? Okay. I just have the little cubes. It's like, oh, this cube is a rogue because it's black. This cube is a cleric because it's orange, or is it fighters are orange? I can't even remember, right? They're just wizards or the white cubes. I don't know. They're just these are your little adventurers, but they're just resources anyway, right? So it's thematically the theme is there, right? It's D&D. How much it really evokes the fantasy theme? Well, I guess I'll let Erock maybe. Why don't you talk a little bit about Lords of Waterdeep?
This is an interesting choice for this. Actually, this is another one that Babe and I talked about before we actually started filming and talked to you guys about this. And I said, this is a really good choice for this list. I said, it's never going to make my list, but it's a really good choice for this list. Because at the end of the day, it's not really fantasy. It's really just a worker placement, and you're putting up different buildings and you're using resources to do other things. But it is D&D, and D&D is one of the ultimate fantasy game systems, everything, worlds, environments there is. At the end of the day, there is no magic in this game. The closest that you get is sending wizards out to do something. But I also have a problem thematically with how it presents that too, because you don't get them back. So if I send 4 warriors and 4 wizards out on a quest, how do I get 3 rogues back? I don't even understand how that is supposed to happen. All right.
And a warrior and a wizard love each other very much.
Oh, show me later, babe. But I still think, generically, outside of my ridiculous draconic rules, I think this is a really good choice for this because it is incredibly Dungeons and Dragons adjacent, which evokes probably the most fantasy just feeling out of all of them. I think D&D probably evokes more of a fantasy feeling than Lord of the Rings, really, because it's everything. It's dragons, it's magic, it's sorcerers and evil spirits. Like, it's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. And this game is relatable because of that. You can envision it. It's one of those things where you're not really doing anything fantasy at all in this game, but it feels like the fantasy's going on all around you. And you're just kind of like a person in this town doing stuff, which is kind of the point of the game. You're a Lord of Waterdeep. You're sending people out to do missions and build buildings and kind of sink the other players every once in a while because you want to be the Lord of Waterdeep. You know what I'm saying? So I think it really fits this list well. It absolutely will not make my list for this. It could very well make, I was going to say worker placement, but that's completely different. That's mechanisms.
That's mechanisms.
Themes. Yeah. But I can't fault the people for it. I think it's great. No. I'm only going to fault you people for your choices. I'm not going to fault the people for their choices.
Wrong, right? Except that time when they picked a polyomino game when I said no polyomino games. But no, with the theme here, obviously D&D is, so pervasive and whatever, but it feels like somebody wanted, well, 2 things. One, when I think of D&D, I think dice. And this game has no dice in it, which is really an interesting combination. It really feels like somebody was like, hey, how are we going to con people into playing a dry Euro? Put D&D theme on it. And that's what happened here. And that's fine with me because I'll play a dry Euro. I like a dry Euro. I don't care. Right. So put a nice fancy theme. And I think the artwork's pretty nice too, actually, in this game, I agree. Put all that together and all right, I'm in. Like, let's play Lords of Waterdeep.
I agree. I'll play this. And, if it helps to get somebody else to play it who wouldn't normally do so, then that's a bonus. People that play Magic and D&D and don't really play board games, and you say, well, this game's D&D. It's just a different kind of way of playing that. And you get them to sit, and if they have a good time, then you open their eyes. And I think that's something really cool about themes, is that you can bring people into the hobby that wouldn't normally think that they're in the hobby. Like they would separate themselves mentally from the things that we do just because they don't feel like they fit there. Whether that's a good or a bad thing in their minds, it depends on the person. But I think people don't feel like they fit in our hobby. And I think themes are a way to show people that they do, that you can relate to this. All you're doing is a couple of little ways of pushing things around the board, but this. Harry Potter. It's right here. So all you got to do is learn how to push the little pieces around. About all kinds. About zoos, or about the ocean, or about space. So it's a really cool way to bring people in and show them the really cool things that we do, that we sit around here and talk about, and the different mechanisms like that we talked about. And, it's just a really cool entryway into the hobby itself. So I appreciate themes a lot. I'm going to have many unpopular opinions as we go through this. I promise you that. This was just an hors d'oeuvre of me telling you what is and what is not a proper theme for our category. But all over and all day long, I think they're fantastic. I think it's way better than abstract as far as it goes. I love abstract games, but at the end of the day, you're never going to win anybody over with an abstract game. You're never going to put something on a table that's like a grid with stones, and you're going to be like, oh, this is the greatest game ever.
There are some people that you could win over with that. But I think we did hit the big three. Like I said, fantasy IPs here. There are definitely others. I think probably the thing that I'm most surprised that didn't get mentioned by anybody or the people, etc., which is just something that is not my thing, which is Magic the Gathering. That's a really
I considered
big
it for this because it is very thematically fantasy. There are a lot of the things you do. You game literally cast spells. You don't literally cast spells, You throw fantastical beings out on the board. Like, yeah, it fits. Absolutely. It was in my top, let's say 5.
Nice.
And it doesn't even have a dungeon crawler.
I have to say, looking at your screen, you've got Champions of Midgard and Role Player and Gloomhaven, all around your head, and Dwellings of Eldervale. That's absolutely fantasy, right?
Absolutely.
It's like you've got a fantasy halo around your head right now, Erock.
Yeah, it turns out I really like fantasy. It's one of those things. I kind of grew up reading those kinds of books and everything. And then, I don't think sometimes you don't realize how much you like something until you get into this kind of format and you start making the lists and start researching a little bit. And you're like, wow, there's a lot of games I like in the fantasy genre, It's because that's a lot of what I play. It's what I grew up reading and stuff. And it's just fun.
Yeah. And like I said,
that's it, I guess.
I was surprised that I didn't have a lot of fantasy games higher on my list. So, but hey, I like lots of other things more, and we'll be talking about those as we continue on in this series, Gaming Through Themes. So I'm Steven, that's Erock, that's Tiffany, that's JJ. We're Just Got Played. If you want to look in the description of this video below, you can see links to all of our different social media where you can follow us. If you want to go to the Facebook group, that is where I do these polls that I mentioned. I also put those polls in Discord, and that is where, if you want to come talk to us about this video or anything else, or themes that are coming up, or themes that you want to hear about, or hey, it's not like we're done with Gaming Through Mechanisms. We'll never be done with that other series. So if there's a mechanism video you want to hear from us, come tell us that. But anyway, just look in the links below. Give us a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you want to hear more content like this. But until the next time, thanks for coming to watch us.
Take care.
Tell me how I'm wrong.
Under the Discord.
Oh, I will.